Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has announced his resignation after his governing coalition fell apart. The four parties failed to agree on measures to address immigration. Crisis talks between partners fell apart late Friday evening. Rutte is the Netherlands' longest-serving leader. His government will stay on in its caretaker mode until new elections later this year. Journalist Gordon Darroch is following this story from The Hague for us. Gordon, Dutch's outgoing Prime Minister mentioned insurmountable differences within the coalition government when resigning. What was he talking about there?
The differences were between the four parties in the coalition. There are two parties on the right, effectively, which is Mr. Rutte's own Liberal Party and the Christian Democrats. They wanted to take a much harder line in immigration. Particularly, they wanted to limit the numbers arriving at the border and the number of families who could be reunited. On the other hand, you had two coalition partners, two smaller parties, the Liberal D66 Party and the Christian Union, who wanted a more humane approach to asylum. They argued that the problems in the asylum system, which included a huge overcrowding at the reception centre last summer, were best fixed by adopting a more humane approach and integrating refugees faster into Dutch society.
Why did those differences become so important now, though?
Well, the talks have been going on for about 9 months, and they really came to a head this week when Mr. Rutte imposed effectively a deadline of the end of this week because the Parliament was about to go into recess to come up with some kind of deal. And he proposed an idea to limit family reunification for asylum seekers, which was rejected by the other two parties. And at that point, Mr. Rutte effectively said that if they couldn't come to an agreement, then he would withdraw his party from the coalition. They tried to modify that proposal by saying that it would be an emergency break measure and would only be imposed if the number of asylum seekers became too high. But that again was rejected. And at that point, Mr. Rutte gave a press conference last night saying that the four parties couldn't reach an agreement and they were collectively withdrawing, which is an important point. It wasn't that one party withdrew, but that all four parties decided to end the coalition agreement. OK, so no coalition, no deal, no Rutte. What's next for the country? Well, the government will continue on a caretaker basis and Mr. Rutte will be Prime Minister. He could potentially form a new coalition without going to the polls, but I think by all accounts that is extremely unlikely. In fact, the Electoral Council has already been advising to have an election in November because we will have the summer break first and then the government has to put through a budget in September. So they will continue as a caretaker government until November, and I think Mr. Rutte will then look to take this issue of migration as a very strong issue for his party into the election campaign, arguing that he's taking a hard line. He will hope to retain voters who might otherwise defect to parties even further to the right who want asylum applications to be stopped altogether. And on the other hand, you have the parties further on the left who argue for this more humane approach to asylum. And I think that will be one of the key issues during the election campaign in the autumn.
I bet it will be. Gordon, just let me ask you, what is the message here when it comes to migration in the EU?
I think it shows what a thorny issue it is and how deeply parties and perspectives are divided on the issue. I think certainly you see a lot of, around the European Union, you see a lot of right-wing parties, far-right parties, even centre-right parties wrestling with this issue, trying to find a way to limit asylum seeker numbers and keep their own voters on board who are sceptical or want to see fewer refugees in the country. I think it's a really thorny issue, and I think you'll see that this Dutch election campaign that the very polarising views from the various parties.
And an issue all EU states are facing right now, that's for sure. Gordon Darroch, thank you very much for your analysis from The Hague.